G'day, Danger Mouse here. Today we're going to check the valves on the TE449. Obviously this is the same for TC, TXC and 511. Yeah, very similar engine, slightly different valve settings for the TC and TXC, but yeah, otherwise the procedures are the same. So this is my bike. Just giving it a good clean, and all around the frame, the wiring looms, paying particular attention to cleaning around the cylinder head area, which we're going to pull lots of bits and pieces off, so we don't want any dirt inside the engine. So yeah, we'll get into it. Righto, so first of all you want to take off the seat and the side covers. I've taken out the left hand side cover already, loosened off all these bolts. Incidentally, these special step screws, they're a Husqvarna part, probably getting a bit harder to get these days. Dealers are not supporting the bikes as well as they should be. Easy solution for that. So Honda CRF track pack from Bolt. They have the step bolts in there. They're quite inexpensive, and I think there's from memory half a dozen bolts in there that should you know, replace any that you lose. Ideally when you're working, use a parts tray. Parts are less likely to disappear then. First operation is to pull the horrible Husqvarna air cleaner design out. I want to try and take particular attention, if you're not going to be cleaning the air filter, take particular care not to get any dirt on the clean side, which is the top side. That'll give you plenty of room to access the top end of the engine. I prefer to release these relays. They slide up like that off their little keepers. Gives you more room underneath. You can tuck them up through the centre frame out of the way. Moving around to the left side. Same again with the relays, you can get those out of the way. Main one you want to get here is the coil wire. You've just got a squeeze clip on it. Pull it out of the way. On my bike it's still attached to the cylinder head here. Some guys run the earth up to the frame. They suggest that there's less vibration there and it won't fail. At the moment mine's fine, about 180 hours, but yeah, you may want to move that yourself. And next is to remove the bolt out of the coil pack. I'll go ahead and do that and then show you how to remove the coil. Okay, so I've removed the bolt from the coil. It's now free to rotate around, side on. And then you can lever it up through the centre of the frame. Not a particularly easy thing to get to, but it is doable. Now I have moved this wiring loom here up on top of the frame. It's usually down beside it to give me some clearance. And the coil comes out. Okay, so the coil is free. Now we're going to pull off the tappet cover. I've moved all the wiring up. I've taken a rag and cleaned as much dirt off the frame and the wiring looms as I can. So now we want to get down here with a toothbrush, clean around all these 4 bolts so no dirt drops in when we remove them. Obviously I have my own side breather here on the cylinder head, makes for easy access. If you've got the zip tie breather up here, obviously you'll want to remove that first, get rid of all the hosing and whatever for it to give yourself some access. And yeah, go ahead and pull the bolts out once you're happy that it's clean. You may want to blow around there with compressed air. I'll do that with the camera off. Righto, so I've cleaned around all the bolts with a toothbrush. Frame access isn't great with this spar across here, so there's a good old ratchet spanner. This one's a plain spanner, going old school. You don't have to get the bolts very far undone before they'll wind by hand. So yeah, it's just a matter of getting your fingers in there and dealing with it the best way you can, and out come the bolts. Bolts are now removed. Now you can see how this far corner here is going to foul on the radiator hose when it's lifted up, and also these half moons here need to come up with the lid and clear the cylinder head. And then at the back here, the injector sometimes catches on the rear edge, so you need to sort of lift it level and flex the radiator hose out of the way, and then draw it out to the right hand side here, which I'll do now. So I'm reaching from both sides of the cover. You don't want to catch the gasket on the cylinder head and tear it. You need to support it from underneath with both hands. And there's the cam setup exposed. Put it somewhere clean on a rag, upside down, and then cover it so no dirt gets inside. Obviously whatever's in there will go back in your engine when you put the lid on. Another important note, you can see on top of the spark plug tube here, the gasket's lifted slightly on the corner. Either one of two things, either press it back into place or lift it off and store it with the tappet cover until you're ready to put back on. Obviously if that's out of place or falls inside the motor, you're going to have an oil leak and possibly worse, caught inside the motor. Both less than desirable. Righto. Now you want to get the engine up to top dead centre firing. There's a couple of marks on the cam gears that'll show you where that is. Now, on the exhaust cam, we have this small drilled hole here. There's another one that's just out of view now down on the inlet cam. The easiest way to roll the motor around to top dead centre is to put it in 6th gear and wind the rear wheel. Now, small movements of the wheel end up being quite large movements of the motor, so you need to move it fairly slowly and carefully. It'll want to run over the compression stroke like that. Now you can see this dot is coming down level with this machine centre section. The one for the inlet cam is coming up at the moment. You want both of those to be lined up with the level area as close as you can. And when it's correct, you'll be able to see this one here. Now, I actually said before inlet cam, this is actually the exhaust, this is the inlet. So inlet mark is just there, the exhaust mark is just there, and they're fairly close to level with here. Now, a tooth or two either way for checking only is not a problem. If you are having to adjust the valves and remove the timing chain, you will want to lock that. Now, there is a Husqvarna lock bolt to go in the crank. Today I'm checking only. If I need to buy shims or what have you, then I'll worry about locking it up later. But for checking only and leaving the chain in place, one or two tooth either way won't make any real difference. The motor goes quite a long way around the stroke before the valves go anywhere near the lobes. So for checking only, that's well and truly close enough. Okay, so we've got the valve train exposed on the bike now, and we've gone to the computer and got the specs. I know for the TE, the exhaust side is for metric between 0.25 and 0.3 millimeters clearance, cold, feeler gauges. Okay, so what that means is you should be able to fit the 0.25 but not the 0.3 in the gap. Okay, so if you can't fit the 0.3 and you can fit the 0.25, then you're within the safe range to run that valve clearance. Okay, so I'm going to do, this is on the left side of the bike, the exhaust valve lobe is here, so you can see that the lobe is pointing upward, the top. This, by the way, is the decompressor that swings and releases when the engine's spinning. Or sorry, it releases when it's down and swings up when the engine's spinning and stops it actuating. So I'm just going to change hands with the camera as I'm right-handed. Now I have my 0.25 or my 10 thou feeler strip, and I can fit it in under the lobe on top of the valve, and it's a fairly loose drag fit. I don't have to force it in, but there's a small resistance as I drag it back out again. Now I have just taken the liberty of trying it with the 0.3 and I can't fit that in, so that valve is still perfect. And then I'll get my feeler strips for the inlet side, which in metric is 0.05 mil to 0.1 mil, and I'll check that one. Now the second lobes, I'll move around to the right side of the bike. The second lobes are a little harder to get to. They're down underneath these bearing covers here, so you'd have to feed your feeler strip in from either side, whichever you can gain the best access from. But the feeling is still the same. There should be a nice light drag fit, so you should be able to fit the small one through but not the large, and the clearance should be correct. Now the clearances are different for the TC model, so it's definitely worth checking the manual each time. Don't try and remember them. Even a good mechanic will tell you don't try and remember clearances or torque settings. Always read the manual. That way you can't mess it up or remember, in inverted commas, the wrong setting. No worries, I'll go ahead and check my other valves. Some feeler strips are quite long and have a bend on the end to make them easy to install or easy to fit into tight areas. These ones I've got here at home at the moment are shorter type, but you can actually remove the strips, so I keep them in order off the bolt to get out the one that you need, use it on its own and then replace them in the stack. This is my 10 thou or 0.25 millimeter strip, so that will make it easier for me to get to the exhaust valve on this right hand side. Okay, so I've moved on to the inlet side now, and again, I know from my specifications inlet is between 0.05 millimeter and 0.1 millimeter clearance. Now I've just checked these prior to turning the camera on, and my inlet side is slightly loose. Okay, I can fit the 0.1 millimeter feeler strip in with heaps of clearance. What I've done now is gone to the next highest feeler strip, which in my case, in my pack, is 0.127 millimeter. So the clearance in thou is 2 to 5. I've had 2 to 4, and I've had to go to 5 thou to get a feeling out of the feeler strip, the drag clearance I was talking about before. If you were going to race the bike, you would tighten that up, close that gap up. Slightly wide is certainly a lot better than too tight, and I don't have a great deal of valve train noise. Given the difficulty in buying shims for these bikes, I'm certainly not going to worry about that, and it hasn't moved in all of the time that I've had the bike. It's always been slightly wide. Not a real issue. If you noted that they were closing up, which the TE series, by all accounts, no one seems to have any issues with the valves moving, wearing. As the valve wears, the clearances usually close. Then you'd certainly be concerned, and you might look at pulling the head off, finding out whether there's been dirt in the inlet and wearing the valves, or what your problem is there. But certainly with a slightly wide clearance, I'm not concerned in any way, and I'm happy to run the bike. This is more just a check to make sure everything's going as it should. I now have 180 hours on my engine, so it's gone quite a way without any intervention. I've never had to shim it, and by all accounts most people find the same thing. Very strong, very reliable in the valve train, and indeed all the way around a reliable motor. So now we begin reassembly, and I'll walk you through that. Right, we're ready to put the tappet cover back on. I'm going to wipe down all the gasket surfaces carefully, get any dirt that's on there or any oil, wipe it back out of the engine, not into it. So that the rubber's got a nice clean, dry, smooth surface to seal against. Pay particular attention to this hard to get edge along the front there. Any oil will want to run off onto that, so you want to make that nice and dry. And then on these sharp corners here where the half moons are going to sit here for the cams, I like to put a little bit of sealer on the edge here. You can use a small amount of silicone sealer. I'm using this Loctite 515. It doesn't set hard, it stays slightly pliable, and I find that, you know, a good sealer for it. Any of the silicone based sealers will be okay too, but be careful not to use great gobs of it, because it'll end up back down inside the engine. Just while I've got the cover off, you can see here my engine breather, and it breathes from in here down into the crankcase through the chain case area there. And the reason I believe it works well, even though there's a fair bit of oil around here, is that this chain runs over the top and runs back down the front, and I believe it carries the oil with it. And I don't believe very much oil comes off this sprocket here. There's no oil spraying directly onto the sprocket. Any oil that's here is actually from the chain itself. All the pressurised oil is in this bearing area here for the cam lobes. So, you know, they're thrashing around quite a lot, throwing oil at the lid, but not so much down here, and I don't get any oil coming out the breather, as that's where it's breathing, not up here where all the oil is. You can see there's quite a wall here to stop any oil coming through. There is a small hole down there. This hole is actually a machining for putting a shaft through for the rockers. And all I did was remove the plug and threaded the hole for a fitting. It's quite an easy job, simple job. It's not anodised, it doesn't have the race look, but very effective. So I've cleaned up the mating surfaces. I'll now clean up the rubber, just wipe it dry with a rag. As I said, I'll put a little bit of sealer just on the corners here to help them seal, and the rubber will take on the metal by itself with no need for any other sealant. So everything from here is just a reversal of the disassembly process. Okay, so we have our tappet cover. A couple of points here to make. As we go on, we want to make sure the gasket stays in place all the way around, so you support the gasket as you put it on. Also, before you put it on, just make sure this chain guide is in place. I've seen a couple of posts on the forums where guys have had this come loose. You can just silicone it back into place. It sits in a little recessed area there. Righto, so these half moons always want to fall out, and sometimes the back edge of the gasket catches on the head and wants to fall out too. So bearing that in mind, we just work it back into place. The other thing is also make sure you put your, if you removed it before, your spark plug hole O-ring on the top there, the sealing ring. just a quick visual confirmation all the way around that the half moons are sitting correctly, the gasket is still attached. Which it is all the way around. And then you want to refit all your flange headed bolts for the cover, tighten them up. They should bottom out, they have this stepped area here. So it will screw down until that step bottoms out, so that will compress the rubber just enough. So no need to swing off it like a gorilla, but it should stop turning and then a nip more, and that should be heaps. Any bolts on the bike that you're unsure of the tension, there's a bolt tension section in the back of the PDF manual, right down towards the back. So any bolts that aren't covered in a specific section, like you might have an axle bolt tension, that will have, you know, data there in the text for the removing and fitting of the back wheel and that sort of thing. If you find a bolt that doesn't have a tension, there's a generic tension chart there for a certain size bolt, say a 6mm bolt in alloy or a 6mm bolt in steel. And you can use that as a guide if you're unsure. Okay, so my 4 bolts are done up. Next is to drop in the the coil into the cam cover. Before I put it in, I should point out it's got its hold down bolt, which we removed. So you put it in longitudinal between the frame spars and then turn it around to the correct angle. Another thing I didn't mention is with connectors disconnected from the bike, make sure that the ignition or the power switch, if yours is a non-ignition bike, remains off. The KN system doesn't like being powered up with sensors being disconnected, can lead to failures or problems. So yeah, just another tip, just in general, whenever you're working on the bike, if you have anything disconnected, remove the key or disconnect the battery so you know that you can't power the bike up. Refit the coil connector at the same time. A lot of room here under the frame. Probably shouldn't have been so lazy and gone and got my ratchet spanner rather than my plain spanner. Okay, so that's the head cover back on and the coil refitted. Now it's just a matter of repositioning and refitting all the parts that you removed before, and just confirming that it starts and runs, and all should be sweet. Now if you did have to change the valve clearances, there's a special Husqvarna half ball adjuster for the inlet side and shim for the exhaust side. You can buy those in varying sizes, but to my knowledge they're not available aftermarket, so you would have to see the old Italian Husqvarna dealers, someone like Hall's in the US. So ideally, keeping an eye on them, you would know ahead of time and you could pre-order them, not leave it for the day before race day, or a long ride that you want to do and suddenly need shims. But by and large they're very reliable engine. No one seems to be having any valve train trouble, but it certainly does pay to check them. And there you go. Okay, so all of the connectors are back on. The air cleaner's now fitted. I've got no loose wiring, and job is complete. Ready for another ride. Excellent.